They may not be throwing the ball too well yet, but don't let that fool you. There's an air of confidence in the Braves camp this spring.
Our team is very strong, and I still think the strongest part of our team is our bench. We have guys that are capable of coming off the bench. Our team is basically set all the way around except for probably the left field position.
Starting pitching proved to be an Atlanta weak spot last year. Veteran knuckleballer Phil Niekro feels 2 additions will help.
We've strengthened ourselves some in getting Terry Forster and Pete Falcone. We haven't lost anybody. I think a couple of other clubs in our division, the Giants and the Dodgers, lost a couple key players on their ball club, so I don't see how they can be any stronger.
National League MVP Dale Murphy is getting an extra work early. Murphy carried the Braves through the early part of '82. He's hoping for another good start.
Just try to get, use spring training to get my timing down and just try to make good contact, get in good shape, and get ready to go for opening day.
The Atlanta Braves hoping to show the fans and themselves that they can repeat in the National League West.
Although the topic of the House banking hearing was mortgage foreclosures, the real issue was what happens to families when the parents work hard in steel mills and farms, only to end up losing their homes due to unemployment or bankruptcy. Bill Olmsted lost his job last April after 13 years at the Fairfield Steelworks. Paying his family's bills has exhausted his life savings, and now he's afraid he'll lose his home.
It's difficult for me to understand why this country, with all its bounty of resources, cannot provide jobs for its people. I am hopeful that soon I will again have a job, hopefully in the steel industry, by December of this year when the seamless pipe mill is in operation in Fairfield.
With 10,000 steel workers unemployed in Birmingham, Jack Guyton has the unenviable position of credit union manager of the Fairfield plant. He says in his 17 years at the credit union, he's never seen so many hardworking people facing the possible threat of foreclosure.
While we can stretch out mortgage payments in the short term, we cannot prevent foreclosure down the road, particularly for those 8,000 unemployed steel workers who will not be absorbed by the opening of the new seamless pipe mill. In short, these people are holding their own at the moment, perhaps by the grace of God.
Congress is considering a bill for government to loan unemployed homeowners money for mortgage payments until they return to work. Then they must repay the government in full with interest.
Unemployment compensation was the subject of Senate debate today. Benefits not for those currently on the jobless lines, but instead increased benefits for those who lose their jobs only after this bill becomes law. Standing by live in the rain at the state capitol is Chris Grimshaw. And Chris, we understand it looks like this measure is on the way to final passage.
controversial issues, and that bill could be up for a final vote in the next several minutes if it hasn't already in the past several minutes. They've been debating the bill for about an hour, and it's a bill that is designed to increase the maximum unemployment compensation benefits from about $90 a week to $120 a week, and also at the same time increase the employee and employer taxes on unemployment compensation in order to fund the increase. There was some opposition to the bill, and that came primarily from some Republican and some business-related Democratic senators who said they were opposed to what they called a philosophical point on an extra tax that is used and imposed to be sure and fund the unemployment compensation tax until it reaches a minimum level of about $300 million. Pardon me. The sponsors of the bill were contending that the extra tax should be added until the unemployment compensation fund reaches a $300 million level, and then it should be reduced, or the tax should be negated and then reinstituted only if the fund is brought down below $300 million. The Republican senators and the Democratic senators tied with some of the business affiliations had contended that the triggering in of the fund once the $300 million figure has been met should be reduced to $150 million. Both sides agree that the arguments for the $150 or the $300 million triggering in level are purely philosophical and are judgment calls on either side. There was one minor amendment that was added to the bill, and that will mean that the House will have to agree to that minor amendment. The House is already adjourned, so it will be Thursday before this bill reaches any position where it can be in final passage. Most of the debate in the Senate today, though, was centered on the controversial employee payroll deduction plan, education employee payroll deduction plan. The opposition to that bill came from senators who continue to argue that the main purpose of the bill is to provide or to mandate school boards to allow teachers to contribute to the political action campaign funds of the Alabama Education Association. Their contention against that is that it's using state taxpayer dollars to manage the collection of those contributions for a profit political action committee. They say that's wrong. But the supporters of the bill say the cost will be minimal and that the contributions range an entire broad spectrum of contributions that are non-controversial as well, and that also a number of the school boards are already beginning to collect these type of funds voluntarily, and so mandating it won't have any effect at all. That bill, since it was not in the call for the bills to be considered during this special session, requires a 2/3 vote for final passage. When the vote came, the vote was 21-10, one vote over the needed minimum 2/3 requirement. That bill was not amended. That makes it a final passage on that bill, and that bill will now technically be headed toward the governor for his signature to come into law. Mac?
Thanks, Chris. You'll be all dried out with another report for 10, right?
Yeah, it's quit raining now.
Thanks, Chris. Unemployment's been on the...
As I've said all along, this is a violation of the state constitution by the state's chief legal officer, the very man who's sworn to uphold the state constitution. It's black and white, clear as day. He violated the state constitution. I'm so glad Judge Taylor has ruled in my favor, as all along thought he would.
Now, Judge Taylor did not grant you the relief of ordering the Attorney General to pay back the money in question. What do you have to do to see that this is done?
Well, his order specifically provided for me to come back in through Title 66, 230 of the Code of Alabama in order to declare further relief, and I'm specifically going to ask that Charlie Graddick be required to pay back to the state treasury another $25,000 to $30,000 unless he will, of course, do so voluntarily. I'm going to give him 7 days to pay back the state treasury voluntarily. If he does not do so, then I will petition the court to have the court order him to do so.
Although Governor Wallace is now on his third day of treatment for his ailment at Jackson Hospital, state government is still being run under his command. Press Secretary Billy Joe Camp says key aides are screening potential business trips to the hospital to ensure the governor's rest.
Well, normally some department head or cabinet member that had a matter that was pressing enough that they felt it needed to get to the governor at this time would call the office here and talk with Mr. Stanton or myself or Mr. Wallace, someone, Mr. Rustin here in the office, and probably seek advice on whether they should go out there with it or not. And of course, depending on the nature of it and whether it needs to be attended to immediately or held for a while, it would be, if it needs immediate attention, it'll go out there to him.
Late this afternoon, staff members took mail and the legislative reapportionment bill for the governor's expected signature. And the governor today reportedly asked staff aide Bill Rushton to remain with the administration. Yesterday, Mr. Rushton had volunteered his resignation amid stories of his rehabilitation from an alcoholic past. At the hospital, flowers like this one from Medicaid Commissioner Faye Baggiano continue to be delivered to the governor's hospital room. Hospital officials say the governor's stay hasn't caused any hardships.
The patient's privacy is of primary importance, and he is indeed a patient and entitled to his privacy, and it has not caused a problem.
Governor Wallace continues to be treated with antibiotics for his inflamed colon and is expected to stay in the hospital for the balance of the week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at Jackson Hospital.
At first glance, this may look like any farm. In fact, it's part of the Alabama Agricultural Experiment Station, and whether you know it or not, your life is probably being affected by what's being done here. For 100 years now, people have been working to find better production and management methods for farmers and foresters. Many of the people who have worked with the station over the years today came back to take a look at what progress has been made and what lies ahead.
I am a strong supporter of basic research. I support applied research, all that we do in the area of agriculture. And it takes someone who's involved in the industry to know all that we do.
A special marker was also unveiled as part of today's ceremonies, a marker to remind students and visitors to the Auburn campus of the station's history of contribution and of what some speakers today called its ever-increasing role in the future. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News in Auburn.
I bit the bullet, and since the governor was Ulster and Industries in the state of Alabama. And that's
what has already been marked as plaintiff's exhibit, not plaintiff's exhibit, but simply exhibit A to the stipulation, and ask you if you can identify that.
We go out to his apartment, take the documents out there so he could.
And I think just as Judge Taylor very clearly saw the law, and I think any layman, any student of the law would say that this is a clear violation, and we got 9 of the brightest justices in the United States will be sitting on our Alabama Supreme Court, and I feel like they'll rule 9-0 in my favor because it's that clear, black and white.
To say the least, the Lanier Poets are on cloud 9 today. And why not? This 37-36 win last night over number 3 Selma in the opening round of the 4A Region 4 high school tournament was a dream come true. You see, the Poets hadn't beaten Selma in over 2 years. And add that to the fact that the Saints were one of the favorites to win it all this year. And last night's win becomes even sweeter.
We were really thrilled to win the game. I think there was a little luck involved, and Selma might have had a bad night, but still, that's the way it happens sometimes. So we're really excited with the win.
The celebrating can't last long for Lanier. In the sub-region finals tomorrow night, the Poets must take on Carver. The Wolverines have been ranked #1 much of the season, and Lanier hasn't had the best of luck against their crosstown rivals lately. They've lost the last 3 of 4, including both games this season. Coach Bricken realizes the Wolverines will be just as tough to handle this time around.
It's going to just take an outstanding team on effort on the boards because they have so much strength. It's going to take a good shooting night, and I think we're going to have to handle that pressure because they play pressure defense the whole game.
Here at Carver High School, the Wolverines are looking at tomorrow night's game with Lanier as just another step toward their goal of a state championship. Tonight at 10, we'll have a further look at one of the state's best 4A teams. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
For Tennessee All-American forward Dale Ellis, it was his final home game, and he responded with a brilliant 35-point performance with plays like this, staking the Vols to an early, comfortable lead over Auburn. The big man for the Tigers was 6'6", 272-pound sophomore Charles Barkley. He had 22 points to face his team. Tennessee's long-range specialist Michael Brooks was 7 for 7 in the first half, canning one at the buzzer to give Tennessee a 46-32 halftime lead. The Volunteers came out just as hot in the second half, with Ellis working the inside. 6'11" post player Dan Fetterman had a three-point play to give Tennessee a 16-point lead, the biggest of the night. Auburn would not quit. Darrell Lockhart hits from the top of the key to cut the margin to 5. But it wasn't enough as Tennessee converted from the foul line down the stretch to rack up an 82-74 victory for their 17th win. The Vols are now 9-6 in the rugged Southeastern Conference. Auburn drops to 14-9, 7-7 in the SEC.
Evers chartered a bus and brought 50 patients and supporters to be called as witnesses, but they never got a chance to testify. The hearing was taken up by issues brought up by lawyers for Evers. They raised several legal questions. One of Evers' attorneys is John Hennig.
We feel the Supreme Court will reverse the decision in the Houston County trial, and that once they do, this body has no right to act whatsoever.
Prosecutor George Hardesty argued the other side of the case.
That one of the grounds for revocation of a medical doctor's license or suspension of that license is if he has been convicted of a felony. And the procedure we use here, by virtue of the law, is to have charges brought before the commission, have them consider all evidence favorably or negatively in regard to those charges, and then make a determination about whether the license should be revoked, suspended, or say put on probation, or at least just considered at that time.
Evers' attorney Bobby Siegel asked that Hardesty be replaced as prosecutor because the Assistant Attorney General may have met or been in the presence of commission members and could have discussed the Evers hearing without Evers or his attorneys being present. Siegel charged that Evers' rights will be violated if Hardesty continues on the case. Hardesty, representing the state, says that's an insufficient reason for him to recuse himself from the case. The Medical Licensure Commission will rule on that issue March 23rd. Pending that hearing, evidence in the Evers case will begin. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
When the plant is in full operation by the summer, close to 300 people will have jobs.
And that's good news for the city of Wetumpka, where the unemployment rate is over 12%. The plant will begin shipping the new patented micro antennas by late August. Future plans are in the making to manufacture other products at the facility. Currently, about 32 employees are being trained for the assembly line work. National Industries had to expand to the Wetumpka facility because it was outgrowing the wiring harness operation in the Montgomery plant. 201 people have been hired since January. Company president June Collier says the move to Wetumpka was just right.
Everything was perfect. And it's just a lot easier to buy than it is to build. And it's a lot faster, too. So we needed it real quick.
Mrs. Collier had other business matters on her mind at today's news conference. Out in California, the Atari company announced plans to lay off 1,700 employees and move its operation to Asia. While Mrs. Collier says she understands the move, she says that's bad business for domestic manufacturing.
And I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just mad because we're going to look up one day and we're not going to have any jobs. Because any manufacturing company in this country is susceptible.
Mrs. Collier also says those companies are committing treason and leaving this country with the blessing of the United States government. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. The Wetumpka plant will manufacture a patented new micro antenna, which company president June Collier says she hopes will take the country by storm. The facility will have an initial payroll of more than $1 million. When the plant is in full operation by the summer, close to 300 people will have jobs. And that's good news for the city of Wetumpka, where the unemployment rate is over 12%. Currently, about 32 people are being trained for the assembly line work. Company officials say expanding to Wetumpka is allowing the Montgomery plant to expand its wiring harness operation. Company officials expect the operation to generate $20 million in sales. Also today, Mrs. Collier expressed her concern about the Atari company in California moving its operation to Korea and Taiwan, leaving 1,700 employees behind without a job. The move did not surprise her. Rather, Mrs. Collier says that's the trend.
That is the thing these days. Going to the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, Korea is really and truly, if we had any brains at all, where we would be. Fortunately, we have more patriotism, I guess, than we do brains.
But Mrs. Collier says National Industries is here to stay in Montgomery.
We're going to have domestic suppliers. I mean, we can't even defend ourselves without it. And National Industries plans to be a survivor.
Kim Davis, WSFA
and we've all worked
TV
very
News.
hard to...
We need to knock them out so we can, make that one more step up towards a conference tournament championship, and also, to assure us of being in the district playoffs.
I will bring it. I down a walk on it. It was a Christmas present, and until Saturday night I hadn't lost a game, and I'd won 7 straight games. But I lost Saturday night, so I can wear something else now.
Will this be Carver's year? Coach Dan Lewis hopes so. After all, his Wolverines have been ranked #1 much of the 4A high school basketball season. But to obtain that goal of a state championship, Lewis must find a way first to get out of the region. For the past few years, his Carver teams have been unable to advance to state tournament play due to region tournament losses. And Lewis hopes this year will be different.
It has always been one of our objectives to win the region. And we work awfully hard to achieve that. And sometimes you just have to be playing bad. And just one unfortunate thing, sometimes it happens.
The next step to a state championship goal for Carver comes tomorrow night in Prattville against crosstown rival Lanier in round 2 of the Region 4 tournament. The Wolverines have already whipped the Poets twice this season, and there might be a tendency to look past Lanier. But the players say no way.
They rolling now, and I think that Lanier right now is the team to beat if we are to go to state.
No, we'll never will come from going to a game because we know we're going to have to, play hard against every team because they're going to play hard against us.
The Carver-Lanier winner advances to the Region 4 title game on Saturday, and from there it's on to Tuscaloosa for the state championship. Coach Dan Lewis hopes his Wolverines will be making the trip. Rick Podge, WSFA TV Sports.
I think, again, maybe he put himself into that position to do something that he really didn't want to do. And I don't believe he wanted to do that. But I think I started hearing rumors, getting phone calls from around the country. What I was told that Herschel.
I feel bad for Herschel Walker because I think that Herschel maybe played with fire and got burned. I think he did something he did not want to do, something that he'll probably regret. But it's been done, and I think now the best thing for Herschel is to go ahead and make the best of what is obviously a marvelous opportunity. Am I mad at Herschel? In some ways, I'm mad at Herschel like I'd be mad at my own children. But at the same time, I love him, and I think he made a bad mistake. He'll have to pay for it. But I think he'll recover, and he'll have a successful career and do well in whatever he does the rest of his life.
Here's a shot sheet on this game. Virginia in orange. Ralph Sampson on a rebound. He goes to Othell Wilson, who had an outstanding performance for Virginia. Othell Wilson had 27 points tonight. Here's a good play from Ricky Stokes to Sampson on the touch back to Stokes. Virginia was up 20-11. But Virginia turned the ball over, and Clemson managed to take advantage. The man who comes up with a shot here is Warren Wallace. Now, he'll miss. Then there's a rebound, and finally Mark Campbell scores. Mark Campbell had 26 points for Clemson. In the second half, it was all Ralph Sampson. Sampson had 19 points in the second half, 29 points for the game. In overtime, the game was tied 83-83. There are only 6 seconds to go. Othell Wilson with the jump shot. He scores, and with this basket, Virginia downs Clemson 85-83.
In his order, Judge Sam Taylor recognized that the circuit court would be a launching pad for an appeal to higher courts. His order says, quote, "The interpretation of the law will ultimately lie with the higher court." The judge admits that the question raised by the lawsuit is, in his words, considerably more complicated than it first appears. But Attorney Julian McPhillips, who filed the suit, sees the question as clearly defined.
I think any layman, any student of the law would say that this is a clear violation, and we got 9 of the brightest justices in the United States will be sitting on our Alabama Supreme Court, and I feel like they'll rule 9-0 in my favor because it's that clear, black and white.
Oakley Melton represents Mr. Graddock and other state officials in the case. He says he'll recommend to his clients that they appeal the matter to the state Supreme Court.
Basically, we will contend in the Supreme Court that the purpose of the constitutional section, the historical purpose, is to prevent the legislature from increasing the salary of a popular public official while he's in office during his term of office, or to prevent the legislature from decreasing the salary of an unpopular state official during the term of office.
Before the 9 justices actually hear the case, the attorneys will be required to file briefs. This means the arguments before the Supreme Court could take place sometime this summer. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
We're living in a post-industrial age where most Americans are employed in the information knowledge business. That's what University of Alabama Birmingham Vice President Dr. Robert Glaze says, and it's those changes that have forced many textile and steel workers out of a job, jobs that Dr. Glaze says they may never get back.
For most of those people, the jobs which they left are never coming back.
But instead of waiting for plants to recall laid-off workers, Dr. Glaze says employees should be retrained. And that's where he says schools can help those workers get back on their feet. Another area that's fallen prey to America's changing times is the agriculture industry. But Auburn University President Dr. Hanley Funderburg says the agriculture business remains vital to competition on the foreign trade market.
And we can produce it. We haven't spent very much time on how to market it. And that's what we've got to do a better job of.
And Alabama's role in the post-industrial age is setting up what University of Alabama President Dr. Joab Thomas calls a research park. Tim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The 10 were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiracy to commit a fraud in the case involving the payment of kickbacks in the Hurricane Frederick cleanup. In the kickback scheme, the 10 allegedly inflated the prices of bids and contracts awarded for mobile home setups to provide housing to hurricane victims. Federal officials claim the prices of those bids were inflated so kickbacks could be paid to 2 officials of the temporary housing program, which was responsible for the mobile home relief effort. The amount of kickbacks was reportedly between $500 and $600 per mobile home setup. Today, federal judge Truman Hobbs sentenced Donald Williams of Mobile, Ronnie Kirkland and William Fountain of East Bruton, Jack Sullivan of Atmore, John Peters of Louisiana, Luther Henry and Lewis Henry of Pineville, Louisiana, and James Harrell of Baton Rouge to 3 years probation and were ordered to pay a $1,000 fine each. Former director of the temporary housing program, Lemmy Lee Kelo, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and was told by Judge Hobbs to report to authorities by March 2nd. The former deputy director of the program, Toofy Deep Jr., was sentenced also to 8 years in federal prison for his part in the kickback. Deep was taken into custody by federal marshals and is to be housed at the Montgomery City Jail until transferred to a federal facility.
Dollar signs adjacent to what some of the costs would be.
And nothing is ever accomplished to follow through on the mobility.
Therefore, we want to signally monitor any package.
I'm going to be very reluctant to project significant growth because
that you know exactly what the status is. Would you talk to us for a moment about the condition of the health?
Well, I think
the growing competitiveness in NASCAR racing is most clearly shown by the ever-changing cars, teams, and sponsors on the circuit. Bobby Allison drove the Gatorade number 88 to victory in the Daytona 500 last year. This year, he's in car number 22, sponsored by Miller. And many other of the sport's biggest names have new rides, like Buddy Baker and Cale Yarborough.
It's almost a bidding process now. You know, a big company wants to get in, and if he gets what he buys is what it amounts to.
Yarborough is driving in a car sponsored by Hardee's, the same car driven last year by Benny Parsons, who's now in a Skull Buick. Parsons has a simple explanation for all the changes.
The cars that win, the drivers are set. The cars that don't win, they're going to be looking for other drivers.
Even Darrell Waltrip, who won more races than anyone a year ago in his number 11 Mountain Dew Regal, is now in a bright yellow Pepsi Challenger. With all of the changes, some things remain the same, like the bright red, white, and blue STP car number 43 of Richard Petty.
The deal with me is that, you know, Richard Petty and Petty Enterprises is all the same thing, so I'm not going around changing rides with different drivers, different car owners. If I was, I'd have different number cars, different color cars. So, you know, just staying in one place is why I'm still like I am.
If you want to keep up with everybody else, you'll probably need a program.
We will recommend to the state officials that the order of the trial court be appealed to the Supreme Court. The court recognized in its order that it is a very complicated and legal and constitutional question. And even though everyone agrees the present salary being paid to the Attorney General is the legal and correct amount, this case does have some far-reaching effects, and we're going to recommend to the state officials that it be appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama.
Lady here had selfless service and was unsung, and that's one of the things we've been seeking this morning.
It's interesting to see the wide variety of persons.
Persons with fact information available on call so that we get down to the
For the past 21 days, a 5-member investigation board has been studying why and how the F-4 went down while on a routine training mission. The jet was virtually shredded into thousands of pieces from the crash. There were no flight or instrument recorders on the craft. Director of Safety at Air University, Lieutenant Colonel George Giganti, says the fighters normally don't carry instrument recorders.
We would not have any flight data recorders because we would not want
the enemy to learn the capabilities of the particular weapon system that they've found.
The investigation board had to recreate the flight and the action of the crew members before and during the crash. Without the aid of instrument recorders, the investigators had to turn to the parts of the plane for the answers.
For instrumentation, say, that lost their needles and pointers, they can actually subject the instrument to certain chemical processes and then see exactly where the needle would have hit under the impact.
The board has completed its investigation into the crash of the F-4 and filed its official report yesterday. As to what caused the crash, we can't tell you and may never be able to tell you. The information contained in that report is strictly confidential and is to be passed along to the different agencies involved in the flights of F-4s. The information in that report will be used to make sure that a crash like this never happens again. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News, Maxwell Air Force Base.
If you've never seen asbestos, this is what it looks like, flaky and soft. It was used as insulation in many of the ceilings and walls in county schools. This portion is in the Lanier High School gym, just one of 4 locations set for work during AEA.
Over at Patterson and over at Harrison, we will move right on in and strip all of the asbestos out of those rooms. We only have a small number of rooms at each site. We'll also do the same thing at Lanier Gym. Now, Daisy Lawrence is the 4th site that we'll be working in, but it's
Board members are happy about finalizing plans for asbestos removal, but they are a little dismayed at the amount of money they received for the project.
We had anticipated getting $1,250,000, and we only got $1,057,000, so we were some $190,000 short.
Here at Daisy Lawrence Elementary School, the asbestos problem is pretty bad. Inspectors found asbestos on all these 3 floors. And because of the amount, work can't be completed during the AEA holidays, so some temporary classrooms have been brought in, and students will have to study there until all the asbestos is gone. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The House approved 2 minor technical changes to the unemployment compensation bill tacked on by the Senate Tuesday. Those changes were uncontested and the bill passed 82-8. The bill will provide a $30 a week maximum benefit increase, but only for those people who lose their jobs after July 1st. That bill now goes to the governor for his expected signature. The Wallace administration was also pushing a bill to consolidate 5 state agencies, but in the waning moments of passage, the bill was sent to a conference committee which added a 6th agency, the Criminal Justice Information Center. Within 30 minutes, that decision was reversed. No one readily admitted to the reasons for the last-minute addition, then removal of the CJIC agency, but sources say it was a power struggle over the directorship of the agency. With that reported struggle over, the consolidation bill passed overwhelmingly in both chambers. In other action on the last day of the session, the House killed a Senate resolution to create a committee of legislators to investigate the faculty unrest at Auburn University. The House also killed a bill that would have allowed Birmingham to permit Sunday sales of liquor. Sponsors of the bill had beer sales at the upcoming Birmingham Stallions Sunday football games in mind. One resolution that did pass, sponsored by Ozarks Representative James Sasser, discourages the use of Atari products until and unless the video game company changes its mind about moving production of its equipment from California to Hong Kong and Taiwan. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. The unemployment compensation bill needed only procedural House approval of 2 minor changes to clear the last hurdle before being delivered to Governor Wallace. The bill passed overwhelmingly in the House, And when it is signed by the governor, it will provide the jobless with $30 a week more in maximum benefits and will levy a group of additional taxes to pay for those higher costs. Employees will more than double their contribution, while employers will see 3 separate tax increases to help foot the bill. But all of these increased benefits will only go to those who file for unemployment benefits after July 1st. Another administration-sponsored bill to consolidate 5 state agencies passed, but not until it had gone through a number of changes which added, then removed, a 6th agency. The administration says the 5 agencies are being consolidated to help reduce duplicative costs. The agency will be headed by key administration aide Bill Rushton, who was honored by the House and Senate today. Both chambers passed resolutions applauding Mr. Rushton's rehabilitation from an alcoholic past and saying thanks for what they call his excellent work with the Wallace administration. With the adoption of these 2 key bills, the legislators called it quits and went home. The next scheduled meeting of the lawmakers will be in April for their annual regular session of the legislature. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
There's a right way and a wrong way to choosing a career. The right way is deciding what you think you'd like to do and asking a computer what their future holds in that profession.
A student or an adult who's looking for an appropriate career can sit down at the computer and say, look, I want an occupation that has a future outlook that's increasing, can put in a salary requirement, put in temperaments and their interests and their aptitudes and their education level, and the computer will take all of those requirements in connection with one another and then give the individual a list of occupations that would meet their own particular requirements.
The computer shows the future outlook of the most popular and rapidly growing professions. Most are in management fields like purchasing, public relations and advertising, and communications. The computer readout shows radio and television are good fields to select. But the road to a successful career begins at home with books and the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and now research. The career computer is part of an exhibit at the Governor's Conference on Careers. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The board has completed its investigation into the crash of the F4. They completed that investigation yesterday, and they did find a cause. That's about all we can tell you, because the information included in that report is strictly confidential and will be passed along to the different agencies that are directly involved in F4 flights.
The report contains those recommendations and actions to preclude recurrence of this type of mishap. The report is sent up to the major command owning the aircraft, and they send it to their appropriate agencies staffed at the headquarters itself.
While we don't know what caused the F4 to crash during a routine training mission, we do know some of the steps the board went through to determine what happened. Investigators flew the same path taken by the F4 in a similar jet, and also by helicopter. An extensive map of the area was made, and pieces of the jet that broke up upon impact were marked on the map. This, with accounts from witnesses, gave the board a reasonable explanation on how the jet came down. Next, the board members took pieces of the F4 back to Maxwell Air Force Base to examine key components to determine if they were working properly. Colonel Gigante says it's rare that an accident board does not find what caused a crash, and he hopes the information learned from this tragedy will prevent another one like it. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
No, I don't feel bad. I feel pretty good. Life is strange. Life is funny, so I'm used to it.
You're doing one the highway. You said life is beautiful. Do you feel that way today?
Oh yes, life is beautiful.
Firstly, yesterday in your statement, you said that you wanted to
Oh well, see the thing is a lot of statements been written that's haven't, at least I haven't said them. People have been said, I said them, but then have you heard them from me?
He as an individual has now must adjust himself to the commitment that he's made and go forward from there.
Didn't make it such that I had the chance to spend as much time as I now. It's a sad day for football, for Georgia football, but it goes way beyond that. I think it's a sad day for football in general that this happened. We've had a wonderful working relationship between the colleges and the pros and the high schools, and this has disrupted it. There is something to be done, that it would probably be done in concert after discussions with the people within the CFA's organization and maybe coaches within the American Football Coaches Association.
As an NAIA school in only its second season of playing as a four-year college, Alabama Christian has gotten quite ambitious with its baseball program. The Eagles have already embarked on a 55-game schedule that includes 15 Division I contests and 19 Division II games. Coach Tom Fletcher says it's an effort to give his fledgling program some respectability.
It gives you a little more respect when you're able to go out and play good teams and play them well and win some games. People take a little longer look at you. It gets you a little more respect and credibility.
The next step into the big time for Alabama Christian comes right here at Harrison Field tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. The University of Alabama comes to town.
We're looking forward to it. Our players are. The students in our school are looking forward to it. And we have a good bit of excitement around here today. And anytime you bring on someone like the University of Alabama, it gets to be an exciting time around here. And we're looking forward to playing them. And it'll be good if we beat them, and it won't be too bad probably if we lose to them.
Fletcher says the Eagles are out to improve on a 29-9 mark from last year, and they have a goal of winning the Southern States Conference Championship in only their first season with the league. And with a talented and experienced team coming back, Fletcher likes his chances. But for right now, the Eagles would settle for a good effort against Alabama tomorrow. Again, starting time is 2 o'clock, and TV 12 Sports will be on hand to bring you the story tomorrow night. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports at Alabama Christian College. Birmingham Southern blew open a tight game in the second half. Dwight Lockhart paced the balanced Panther scoring attack, hitting for 23. That's him with a driving layup in the foul. He connected on the three-pointer. Reggie Keith added 16 for Birmingham Southern. He pops there from way out. Also hitting for 16 were Carl Flowers and Carl Crosby. Crosby, the brother of Georgia's Gerald, connects there with a long-range baseline jumper. Mike Jones led ACC in a losing effort. He paced all scorers with 28. That's him on the end of the fast break layup. Birmingham Southern advances to round two with a resounding 123-86 win over Alabama Christian. In Game 2, AUM grabbed the early lead on Montevallo in a tightly fought first half. That's Glenn Ferguson getting the game's first two off the putback. After the Senators grabbed the brief lead, Montevallo went into a stall to pull AUM out of the zone, and the move worked for Coach Bill Eller. After AUM goes to the man-to-man, Alonzo Williams gets the driving layup here. Lonnie Nixon helped keep AUM close. That's him with the banker off the glass. At halftime, it was still anybody's game as AUM led it by one, but the Senators go on to win it. 30-27, the zone defense worked in the second half. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
A real great experience. Last Saturday night, I got to go over to a raise in salary. I'll give you a raise in salary. Up in my section, we every now and then have a future of our state, future of our nation. And I think that one of the objects of education is to be able to train students who in later life can carry on a continuing educational process. And you're going to see that the jobs of the future are going to demand that a person carry on a continuing learning process, and in his job a continuing analytical process. Relative to his job. Now, this is a subject it's not like teaching somebody the operational process.
Senator Heflin sounded more like a school teacher than a congressman. One subject he lectured on was the importance of high technology, where he says emphasis should be placed on computer literacy. He also stressed the need for refresher courses in the 3 basic R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, but especially writing.
Because the ability to write and express oneself in clear and succinct language where a person can readily know what is trying to be conveyed, what is trying to be communicated, is going to be extremely important.
And the senator says history is one subject that should not be forgotten.
That's the subject matter by which we learn to profit by our successes or our mistakes.
Senator Heflin says as our country adapts to the world of fluid possibilities, we can't lose sight of the basic subjects that have been the foundation of our country. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
A couple of sequels that have added to that group of stories about the lies this morning. And number 2, where the enmity grew and enmity grew and finally reached at the level pertaining to high technology. We're going to, of course, have to emphasize computer literacy, and there's going to be a movement. Right now, today, they look towards the end of the decade, and the estimates by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics that the number of jobs requiring computer services alone will increase by as much as 112% during this decade. It's estimated that by the year 1990 we would be confronted with a severe skilled labor shortage.
On January 26th of 1983, the commission that oversees the Criminal Justice Information Center fired Mr. Blaylock. In the resolution to fire Mr. Blaylock, the commission accused him of pitting several law enforcement agencies against each other for several years, which it says impeded the operation of the overall system. Mr. Blaylock says the commission is wrong on all counts.
Well, one, they did not give me advance notice. They drafted it at the table. It is not one of the listed causes for dismissal in the personnel handbook, and they can't prove the charge that they made.
But Mr. Blaylock takes his charge a step further and says he was fired because of a personal grudge by Jack Wallace, Jr., carried out by Circuit Judge Jack Wallace, who was a member of the commission and sponsored the resolution to fire Mr. Blaylock.
Through intimidation, as a governor's brother.
Mr. Blaylock says the grudge stems from 1978, when he wouldn't allow Jack Wallace, Jr. to remain on the criminal justice system payroll and work full-time in Lieutenant Governor Bill Baxley's unsuccessful gubernatorial campaign. Today's Personnel Board hearing is to determine if Mr. Blaylock has a case, and if he does, set a date for a full-blown set of hearings with witnesses and documentations to try and prove the allegations. The decision by hearing examiner Myron Engel on the full hearing, or any possible settlements worked out between the parties, is expected next week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
I hope I could use this as a stepping stone to advance my career in art. I'm really excited about all the opportunities. It's great that the state has a duck stamp program because it gives the artist a lot of national recognition. These stamps are distributed nationwide. There's collectors all over the United States, and it puts your name right up in the forefront.
chunk of the bill.
Here at home, if you're eating pork chops this month, you're paying more. The Alabama Farm Bureau says pork prices are up almost 4% from last month. But overall, the food price picture for Alabama is good, and you can find bargains in produce and at the dairy counter. Produce prices dropped 9.4%, and dairy prices are down 2.2%. Along with an increase in prices for pork chops comes a rise in beef and poultry prices. A market basket survey of 20 basic food items sampled throughout the state cost $27.12, up 3 cents from last month. The cheapest prices were found in Northwest Alabama, where the 20 items ran $26.33.
In the last few days, there have been reports that the EPA is checking out possible illegal burning of dioxin in the Gulf of Mexico off Mobile.
The director of the EPA's Office of Water Regulations and Standards, Stephen Schatzo, tells me that what they are looking at is the possible lack of notification of what was in the shipment of oil burned by the Volcanus.
In December of 1981, the Volcanus left Mobile with about 800,000 gallons of oil containing cancer-causing PCBs. Part of the material came from Hooker Chemical Company in New York State. Mr. Schatzo says the chemical profile of the oil supplied by Hooker to the operators of the Volcanus indicated that it might contain traces of dioxin. He says they're investigating why the EPA wasn't notified of possible dioxin. Chemical Waste Management operators of the Volcanus tested the material and found no dioxin. Mr. Schatzo says that test didn't meet EPA standards.
What about the Volcanus and Chemical Waste Management's permit to burn PCBs? Mr. Schatzo says he thinks the EPA did a poor job in writing the permit because it was too broad in the chemical compounds that could be incinerated. That permit ran out last September.
Mr. Schatzo says the Volcanus has destroyed dioxin compounds before, and he says if the oil in question did contain dioxin, he's convinced that it was disposed of in a safe manner. He says they'll never really know because there's no more of the oil to test. It was all incinerated. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Regular woven fabric, which is interlaced at a very strict angle on that line, which takes a very short time to replace.
How are you, sir?
For everybody being here today, and Al, would it be anything else? I know you got going up the road.
But waiting for our club met this when we just got away from the meeting.
Al, you're out about 2 weeks. How is the body holding up?
The body's doing pretty good. Like I suspected, mentally it's tougher than physically. I was always prepared physically, and mentally I thought I was prepared. But each day it makes it tougher because if you're running by yourself, you don't have that inspiration when somebody's with you. But I'm hanging on pretty good.
How has the Lion Club support been?
It's been extremely pretty good. Like, of course, we had the people from Montgomery who've been inspiring to me, and that makes me feel better when I try to run 20 or 30 miles today. We've had great line support all the way up to Montgomery, and we're hoping that it will continue.
It was a beautiful day, maybe a little bit on the chilly side, but a big crowd showed up here at Harrison Field at Alabama Christian College today to watch the Eagles take on the University of Alabama.
And those on hand saw Alabama jump out to a commanding lead. Top of the first, this is third baseman Brett Elbin leading off with a shot to short. It can't be handled. On the error, Bama has the game's first base runner. Ty Harbin, the Alabama Christian pitcher, suffered control problems in the inning, giving up 3 walks. This one to Alan Stallings with the bases loaded gave the Crimson Tide their first run. Catcher Mark Edwards followed. He lashes a single to left, scoring Ted McClendon from third. David Magadan will get back safely to third on the throw. A wild pitch scored another run, and Alabama led it 3-0 after an inning. The top of the second, more of the same. An error and a wild pitch had Craig Shipley on third with 1 out. Ted McClendon loops this bloop single to center. Nobody can get it. Shipley scores to make it a 4-0 game. Rod Skates follows with a hot shot past the bag at first. It'll go for a double. McClendon scores easily from third, 5-0 Alabama. An Eagle error scored another, and this single to left by Mark Edwards drives in Skates with the 4th run of the inning. Bama went on to an 11-4 rout. Coach Barry Schoenberger's squad now 2-0 on the year. Tom Fletcher's Eagles dropped to 2-2-1.
From here, Alabama goes to Mobile for a 2-game weekend set with South Alabama. Alabama Christian hits the road. They'll be in Miami next week, where they'll play 8 games against 5 different teams. At Alabama Christian, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.